Welcome to the S.J. Childs Show, where a little bit of knowledge can turn fear into understanding. Enjoy the show.
Introducing safe space staging for kids, creating smiles every step of the way. At Safe Space Staging for Kids, we believe that every child's journey to the dentist should be filled with comfort and confidence. Our mission: to turn dental visits into positive adventures. Imagine a world where dental chairs feel like cozy thrones and waiting rooms are transformed into magical kingdoms. That's the power of our dental staging. We're here to banish dental anxiety and create a safe, soothing environment where kids can be themselves. With vibrant colors, playful decor, and a touch of imagination, we're changing the way children experience dental care. Join us on this journey of smiles, giggles, and happy checkups. Because for us, every tooth deserves a little magic.
Hi, and thanks for joining the S.J. Childs Show. Today, I am joined by a friend who I'm excited to talk to. We live in the same region, but we haven't ever met in person. We have met online a couple of times, but it'll be great to just dive deep into learning more about her and finding out how we can support her. So, Lisa, thank you so much for being here today.
Well, thank you for inviting me. It's really exciting.
Yeah, it's been a long time coming. I think that we've been trying to plan it for maybe 3 years or so. I don't know. I guess I've only been going for 2. So, but yeah, in this time, I'm really glad that, and like you said earlier, and when we were talking before, sometimes things just happen when they're supposed to, and in the right time. And maybe, I guess not even maybe, but now is the right time for us to be having this conversation. So we're so glad to have you here today. Tell us a little bit about yourself and what brought you here.
So I am a mom with an adult son with autism. So somehow that's how we met. Actually, I think you reached out to me one time because of a post I made or something, and I have, his older brother has ADD and his younger brother was actually about a month early. So he's had some developmental delays. So as a mom, I've had all of that. And then I was actually a learning specialist. I was a teacher for a long time. Most of the time I was a math specialist. And my last segment, I was actually teaching in Japan on a military base. And so that was actually during that time, that's when I started researching a lot about brain development and why kids are struggling, because my students, I had like I had a group of students who were just behind because they were moving around, their military kids. But I had a lot of kids who were like, something's different, because they're seeing me and the reading teacher and the OT and the SLP and everything. And so I was really trying to figure out what was going on with these kids. And at the same time, when I moved to Japan, I was actually I was writing a book called Movement Makes Math Meaningful. And so I intuitively knew when I left the classroom. I left the classroom in 2003 before I became a math coach, and then I taught at BYU and stuff like that. And but I kind of knew like we needed to really, because I taught in inner city, and I was like, we need to get kinesthetic movement in math somehow, so the kids can learn it. We were just having a lot of issues in behavioral issues and stuff where I was, and but it was kind of in the back of my mind. And so when I went to Japan, I had collected all these lessons that I created, but I wanted to come up with the rationale, like what's going on in the brain? Why does that help? Like, does it even help with learning, or is it just fun or whatever? So as I was doing all of that, the first thing I ran into was Brain Gym. And so that was like my first entry. And once I started, finding other programs. I started basically learning everything out there, but I realized that actually movement is very, very important for brain development. And then over the years, I became a brain gym instructor, and then I became a provider for like the listening program, the movement program, interactive metronome, all these other programs. And primitive reflex integration is a huge part of it. So I became an instructor for Bloomberg Rhythmic Movement Training. So I kind of got all that side. And then as a mom, I knew that the whole functional health side was really important. That was very important for us in our journey. And so I became a functional health coach, and I started learning about different. I started getting into more of the energy work and kinesiology that kind of bridged the functional health coaching, brain integration, and all of that stuff. So that's that's kind of like what led me to where I am today. I have also access, I have access to lab testing and practitioner accounts and so I have a lot of different really good go-to interventions that I really like. My favorite one is the therapy patches, and and I don't have time to talk about it now, but on my YouTube channel, I actually did a webinar on using these phototherapy patches for mental wellness and cognitive disorders. So that might be something that, we can put in the show notes. Yeah. But basically, I came back to the U.S. for a lot of different reasons. The moon's realigned, or the sun, all the planets realigned, but I couldn't any longer be in public schools, seeing kids suffer. And because what I was doing is I was helping children in secret. Like I was like doing my math stuff, but I was like doing everything
underground
I knew.
Math.
Oh, yeah, I was underground. Yeah. And so I knew that I couldn't really do what needed to be done for these children. So I said, you know what, I need to be able to try to work privately with the families, work with the schools to help them understand like maybe what their role is, and stuff. And so that's kind of how I am where I am now.
And it's so interesting because I think that we resonate on so many different levels, but we got to the levels at such a different way of getting there, and I went through massage college and learned about kinesiology and did that kind of side of things and learned about the body and the mind. And then of course, in both of our, educations through having autistic children, you learn so much and you educate yourself. And especially when you're talking about the brain, I know in the beginning when I was first learning, I didn't have any experience with autism. My husband had a sister with Down syndrome. And so he had experience in working with group homes and experience with other like-minded individuals there. But I didn't have that experience or that knowledge. And so really heading and doing all the research and all of the, the things that come. And then you find all of these things along the way, like you said, that are like bridges to one another, that gap, the knowledge between one thing and the other, just like the functional health, just like the, you had said something that, oh man, brain, can't remember that one, but, yeah, it's so interesting how we can then take all of that and really use it to help people understand how to better access things that work for them in a better way, that they're not working against themselves and against things all the time. How does that help with your family? And now what does that look like for now that they're kind of grown up?
Yeah, well, that's the whole growing up part.
Right? Oh my gosh.
Yeah, because my son with autism, like he is an adult now, so he's maxed out of school. So this is his first year of not being in school, and we're in a total transition with that. And so now I'm trying to figure out, because the last few years I've been here in my house trying to figure out, okay, how can I help kids? And now it's like, okay, now he's home. now I got to figure out, okay, what do we need to do again? It's almost like before he went to school.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, what do I need to do? How do I need to help him? And my oldest was he had very severe ADD. We never had him officially diagnosed because we never wanted him on medication or anything. But he, by the time we had always done, we did a lot of biomed stuff when they were little. So we did help. There was some things that we were able to help, but then there were some things that we weren't. And by the time I found out all the other pieces, he was already a little bit too old to want to change, even though he was even though he knew he was really struggling, he still didn't want to maybe do the effort or the work or whatever. And so now he's like 24, and I'm just kind of waiting until he's maybe about 30, and then he knows where I am. So then if he wants to to help, but yeah, it's there. Now it's a whole I'm glad we started when we did, because there was a lot of things we were able to work on. But now that they're older, it's a whole different chapter, and it's a whole new. I got to figure out, okay, so what am I going to do so Joshua can be still productive?
Yeah,
Exactly.
And
yeah,
and I remembered that what I had thought about when you were talking earlier, and that was about reflexes and about how people don't really know a lot about primitive reflexes, and how that is actually such an important part of who we are as people. I didn't even really understand much about it until just a couple of years ago, maybe even, I guess, yeah, just a couple of years, maybe a year ago. And it's so interesting when we can look at those things, and how can we now that I'm right here in this moment, how can we use that knowledge to then help ourselves and our kids to have a better functions?
So, well, reflex, I mean, like you say, most people don't even know it's a thing. But I mean, so it's interesting because when babies, so some reflexes develop in the womb and some develop after birth. And the point of the reflexes is for the babies to be able to learn to move on purpose. Because when they come out, they're this big ball of jelly, right? Jello or whatever. And but let's say the first thing that they gain the ability to do is to move their head. And then and by doing that, other parts of the body follow. And when they do that over and over, eventually those other parts of the body, they can have control over it, and then they can move them at will, right? And so that's what the reflexes are for. But what happens is when those reflexes are not integrated, then those parts of the body are always at they're
behind almost.
Well, it's like, for example, there's one reflex, one of the first ones is when the head goes down, the legs will bend up. When the head goes back, the legs will straighten. So that's a reflex, and that's the tonic labyrinthine reflex. And so what happens is if you don't get control over that, every time you bend your head down, your legs will, even if it's not very severe, your legs will kind of want to buckle. So those are people who have a severe, fear of heights, because every time they look over the edge of a building or whatever, a cliff or Grand Canyon or whatever, their legs feel like they're going to buckle. So it feels like you're going to fall off, fall over. And so, so it does have lifelong consequences. And in school, there's consequences because some of those reflexes help develop vision. The binocular vision, the able to converge, the near far, the accommodation, being able to copy off the board, all of that kind of stuff is affected. So there's a lot of school influences or kids who have problems in school. If what happens is teachers will think the kids are lazy, or let's say they're standing up and they just want that. See, a teacher tends to want, and I'm going to admit, as a teacher, I'm kind of like this, I want everybody to be quiet. I want everybody to be still or whatever. But what happens is if you really observe what the kids are doing, they're either very uncomfortable in their posture. So it's actually uncomfortable to sit and they need to move, or they need to move because they need to activate their brain to be able to concentrate or focus or whatever, or not fall asleep. So all their behaviors actually tell you something, but there's so many teachers that just kind of want everything perfect.
Yeah.
And then and by forcing kids to try to be like that, they don't realize that they're actually doing a lot of harm. They don't mean to, but
that brain's processing abilities there.
yeah, but all of those like movements and postures and things that actually give you a clue as to what the brain, and when those reflexes are not integrated, the brainstem is not developed. Mm-hmm. So when the brainstem is not developed, then you don't have the neural pathways enough, or strong neural pathways that go all the way up to the frontal cortex. So a lot of kids with ADHD and focus issues, it's because their brainstem is immature, and those brainstem is immature because their reflexes are unintegrated. And you can see it by being fidgety and by just some of the ways that they sit and they move and everything.
So fascinating.
Yeah. And so anyway, those reflexes are a big sign of what's going on. Yeah. And if you don't integrate them, or when you integrate them, you help mature the brainstem. And when you mature the brainstem, then you can help grow the neural pathways.
Yeah, definitely.
So it's very huge.
And what do you think? I was just reading on some of our notes here about children, and saying what you just said. There's teachers see that kids are having these behavior problems, or these things are happening. What do you see as maybe some of the causes for the misunderstanding of what kids are going through today?
Yeah. So the bottom line is everything that's going on in your brain, that's like, if you have a cognitive issue or, no matter what it is, it's a sign of neuroinflammation. Your brain is inflamed. There's neuroinflammation. And that is due to toxicity. I mean, so that's just the bottom line. And so do schools have a role to play in it? Actually, they do, but they don't have complete control. I mean, the parents are the ones that have the most control, but schools have to realize that rewarding kids with candy, with colored dyes and artificial stuff and all the chemicals it's actually hurting the kids. They think they're helping and stuff. So the schools do have some role, but toxicity is the bottom line, and it's neuroinflammation. And what's happening is that when the brain is inflamed, it depends on when it started. If the inflammation started in the womb because of our toxins that we're consuming, because we're not only we're eating it, we're breathing it, we're drinking it, there's toxins everywhere these days. And this is like in the last 20 years, it's just gotten like astronomically higher. And the toxins are coming from so many different sources all at once that you can't pinpoint like one source. It's everywhere, but it's like the last 20 years. And so young moms actually probably think, I think that young moms think this is normal to have kids with all these issues. So if you're a young mom, I'm over 50, it is not normal. It's only been common in the last 10, 20, 15 years that this is happening. But if it happens in the womb, then you're going to get things like autism, or, if it happens maybe when, or maybe ADHD at best, or when they're very, very young, because that's the part of the brain that whatever part of the brain is developing at the time is going to be the part that's affected. So an elderly person who's exposed to the same toxins right now, they're going to get more like the Alzheimer's or whatever. Their brain had already connected, but the inflammation is going to affect them in different ways. And so you can tell also where in the brain and might be the problem by the symptoms. So whatever the symptoms are tells you those are the parts of the brains that are inflamed too. So that's basically the thing. And the brain develops So if you think of an iceberg, you think of the part that's sticking out as the behavior and the academics, or what, the communication ability, whatever you can see from the child. That's what's obvious. But underneath the iceberg, that's the brain, like how connected. In the ocean, I always think of the ocean is like the part that's nourishing the brain. So you have the nourishment, the nutrition, and the environment, and those two shape the brain. But then you have the connectivity, which is how dense is that iceberg, how connected is the brain. And so the nutrition could be either poor nutrition or solid nutrition. And most of these kids have really bad guts, because the gut and the brain are connected. Their guts are inflamed, their brain is inflamed. So they mirror each other. And so the nutrition, even if you're feeding them great food, they might not be absorbing it. They might not be digesting it and getting the amino acids or all that. So the nutrition is critical. Healing the gut is critical. Then you have the environment, and that's like all the heavy metals that we're breathing or eating, the fact that the kids maybe they don't have tummy time, they're sitting in car seats, they're not moving, they're not playing outside, they're on the technology, and all of that plays a role. And those two is going to affect the connectivity of the brain. And the connectivity, the first thing we talked about, primitive reflexes, that is the very, very first foundational piece of how the brain connects, is through primitive reflexes, and through integrating those reflexes, and then the brain develops like all on top of that. So if you have a let's say you have a child, they have vision issues, and you take them to a vision therapist. The vision issues are actually, maybe you might be working too high up in the brain, and you might be working on those vision issues for months and months and months, and finally you have a breakthrough and the vision starts to settle, but then all the other issues the child has still are there. And that's because there's so many more fundamental pieces that if you worked on those vision issues might sort out for themselves, and you might not even have to go to a vision therapist. Mm-hmm. So anyway, just understanding like the hierarchy of where to look and where to start in the brain is really important. But the nutrition and the environment is important, because if we do all these therapies, that's the thing too. If you do all these therapies, you might make headway, and then when you stop, you might see regression. And that's because we're putting fuel on the fire. And as I say, it's like you're cleaning out the refrigerator when your house is on fire. So you have to, if you're going to do all these therapies and spend all this money and do all these things, you're going to want to make sure that you've put out the fire at the same time.
What are some steps that parents can take at home, even now? So my son's 13, he's well into his bad habits and his bad nutrition. And, we're trying things each and every day. Well, what are some ideas that we might be able to start with, just as simple as today?
Okay. So in general, like if you need to overhaul your kids, right? It's basically, you do need to think about like kind of like a 5-step approach, right? You have to decrease the inflammation. There's a lot of detox. You have to make sure then there's nutrients. You don't want to, if you focus on the nutrients, but you have all the toxicity and the inflammation, those nutrients might not go where it needs to go. So you kind of have to work on the other two. Then organizing the system, balancing the parasympathetic and sympathetic, and then working on that brain connection, like through reflexes, for example, and other cognitive therapies. And so those are kind of steps that can be overlapping, but those are kind of the 5 things in kind of the order where you might want to think about. But the first thing that I have, for families, if you have even just one child with an issue, this is going to be a family affair. Okay. And so the first thing you really have to do and have to be willing to do, or everything else is, depending on your individual, thing, what's going on, but as a whole, you have to really revamp of what you're eating, what your pantry looks like, what your refrigerator looks like. And you can't do it for one kid. You have to do it for the whole family. So if these kids, most of them need to be off of gluten, most of us need to be off of gluten, most of everybody needs to be off of dairy anyway. But you can't, what you can't do is tell one kid, you can't eat this, this, and this, and then have it for everybody else.
Yeah.
And there's so many things anyway that's harming us, like all the MSG and the GMOs and the aspartame. I mean, there's so much stuff that nobody needs because even if you don't have a mental problem, maybe you have diabetes, maybe you have some other chronic issue, and all of that is it's contributing to the chronic issue. Or maybe you just have brain fog, or maybe, so you have to, the first thing, if you're not willing to change what's in your refrigerator and in your pantry, then everything else is, you might just be swimming up a really big, upstream. And some things you might be able to accomplish, because there's some issues that might not be so, inflammatory based, but in general, that's the big problem. And so both parents have to be on board. And what you do is you want to first make sure that you both are willing, saying, okay, we're willing to do whatever we need to do for this child. I was very blessed that my husband was on board, and he actually was the stay-at-home dad for 20 years. And it was because he was fortunate that he grew up very sick himself. He was born I don't know if it was parasite, whatever, like he just was born sick. His mom didn't even think he'd make it to a year. He always had something wrong with him. But when he was 17, he's Mexican. He was from Mexico, and he was sick of getting the monthly penicillin shots for his tonsils, or for, like, he said, these are not working, and he hates needles to this day and stuff. And he started going to a homeopath. And he had, in the next couple of years, he had a complete life transformation. But the one thing the homeopath did is he put him on a very strict diet. And most homeopaths don't even necessarily even do that. It's in Mexico. And so because he had his own life transformation for all his illnesses, he really understood, like, when it came down to that, okay, and we've been on a food journey for years. 20 years ago, we didn't even know half of what we, eventually learned later. But we started we got tests, we got advice from, whatever. And like gluten, nobody talked about gluten. We didn't we didn't what's that? And you couldn't even buy hardly anything that was gluten-free. And so at least now it's available, it's easier. So but both parents have to be on the same page. Otherwise, one will sabotage the other. And I'm going to tell you that if you have a food that is actually inflammatory, if you eat any of it at all, it just triggers the inflammatory response. So it's like, so you're just sabotaging it. So you got to get it out. You got to get it out of your, and you can't do everything at once. You choose one thing. Yeah. Maybe today is like, we're going to start drinking clean water. Yeah. We're going to filter our water, and the next day, okay, we're going to get off of this. And you got to transform it. I've had parents that literally the next time I saw them, they said, yep, after I talked to you, I just threw everything out of my pantry. And I'm like, okay, but most people aren't, going to do that, and so you have to pick one thing. When you finally build that into your routine, then you have to say, okay, what's the next thing? Okay, I got to make sure there's no aspartame in anything I ever eat, or there's no MSG in anything that we eat, or whatever. You pick one thing and you start,
definitely
building that.
When DJ was 3 or 4 is when I started learning about the gluten in dairy. So like a decade ago. And same thing, there was hardly any resources available, any information, but I was a medical paralegal at the time. And so I heavily researched why is gluten, why is dairy, why are they causing these things? And, because of the proteins, they are protein, inflammatories. And so, yeah, they just dive right in there and do all of the damage.
There's a few different reasons. Like, first of all, if your gut is messed up and you have leaky gut, then, so first of all, a lot of these kids don't have, they're very low in hydrochloric acid. And that's something that you can work to build up. But if you are, then when you're digesting your proteins, it's like a Lego set. You have a little Lego set, and your body is supposed to break them down to the individual Legos, right? And those are the amino acids. And then you're supposed to absorb them and reconstruct them into the proteins your body needs to a new Lego set, right? So these kids aren't digesting them all the way. They're just like pulling out chunks of Legos. And then because if you have inflammation in your gut, you're absorbing those chunks of Legos, and then your blood, your immune system's going, that doesn't belong here.
Yeah.
And some of those chunks of Legos, those are peptides. Some of them look like your thyroid, and after a while, your body's like looking at your thyroid going, wait a minute, maybe you don't belong here either. Like, and so then you get Hashimoto's or whatever. But there's parts of your brain that gluten also. So peptides of gluten look like thyroid, looks like, different parts of the brain. And so then you start developing these autoimmune things. Well, and then, so that's the one issue. And then the other issue is you have that opiate effect, because those peptides can get into the opiate receptors. And that's when that whole feel good, and you have that opiate effect of the gluten. So if you look and you go, the only thing that my kid will eat is cereal and milk, peanut butter and jelly and milk, or whatever, or cottage cheese, dairy, like, the only thing, because you crave what you are allergic to, you crave what you are sensitive to because of those things. So when you're craving, except when you're pregnant, you crave certain things. It's more of a mineral, but in general. But kids, if you start seeing, what are you always gravitating to, there's something in there that your body's probably becoming dependent on, and you need to cut it out.
That is so interesting, isn't it? And it's going to be hard for a lot of parents, but at the same time, when you see changes in the future, like when we took dairy out the first week, DJ had been reading since he was 12 months old. He was literally tracing words back and forth. And then he didn't speak until he was almost 4. So the vocabulary he had learned for 3 years already had built up so high. Then that first week we took Kason out, he said like 50 words, and it was overwhelming. It was, gorilla, escalator, wow, a chimpanzee, rabbit, all of the words he had, vocabulary he had read and studied, was just like coming out, blah, blah, blah. And none of it made sense. It wasn't anything, put together in any kind of sorted or organized way. But it was like, finally, I can say all of these things I've been learning and I've been seeing and reading. And then when we took the gluten out of his system, practically, I would say 85 to 90% of his physical stimming stopped. And like you said, with the gut, I really feel like that the gluten was creating him to spin and hum and upside down and all of these things to help control those discomforts going on in his body. And so it was just fascinating how a lot of those things stopped. In fact, we were at a restaurant, just my mom and I, the other day, and I heard the sound of this little boy humming. And it was that exact sound that DJ would hum, as the whole 2-3-year-old years. And I was so recognizable. I wanted to say something, but you don't know how to approach things on that side. But it's so fascinating that just removing a toxin from his body helped create communication and helped create this path of being able to be cognizant and learning and receptive and, back and forth. So it's crazy what our brains and our bodies will do.
Yeah. And heavy metals are a big thing, because heavy metals are stored in fat, and your brain is a big ball of fat. So the brain stem, especially like mercury, tends to like the brain stem. And so, yeah, So for us, like we along the way, we've had a lot of we've had progresses, but we never had one of those dramatic events. I actually we've had a couple that were fairly dramatic, um, but I still suspect it's like we go through phases of trying to detox my son, and I think like now that he's home, it's like I think we need to go through another phase because I'm still convinced that there are still metals and there's still something, especially in his language area of his left hemisphere. So, but yeah, detoxing is getting those chemicals out. So like not, so you have one, so you're saying like you just remove it so you don't put it in, but now we got to figure out also like, so how do you get them out? Right.
Yeah.
And the ones that are stuck. And because some people say, well, because even if you do certain tests, if you do a urine, like let's say you do a urine test, well, you might not see anything because everything is stored. It's what it does is it hides itself into organs. So you got to do things to provoke them to get out or whatever. Or you can do a combination of a urine and a stool and a blood and a hair, and you might see like little, and sometimes you won't see anything. And finally, you provoke one metal and it starts coming out, and all like the lead tends to come out first.
Wow.
And once you get lead to come out, then all of a sudden you'll start to see the mercury, because the lead will usually come out before the mercury will come out. So, and I remember on his test from a long time ago, once we started dumping lead, then we started seeing mercury come out. So it's, yeah, anyway, it's a kind of
fascinating.
So it's a long process. And,
yeah, it is a long process.
But you know what? We could all benefit. We all can benefit from detoxing because now we're getting it from all angles. So
absolutely. Oh my gosh.
But
isn't that the truth? What advice do you have for parents moving forward before we close out and tell people where to find you and everything? What is some good advice you can leave us with today?
Well, I have a program called 30-Day Jumpstart. And so that is a good place for, especially for you guys who are kind of new to the journey, that you're like, okay, I have a child. I know that there's issues. I really want to help. I don't know where to start.
Yeah.
So it's called 30-Day Jumpstart to Integrated Child. And that provides all the foundation that you need, like for the first 30 days to get started. It's not overwhelming, but everything that I share, it's like pulled from everything that I've studied. So what I do is I studied all these things and I pull the best from all the little things and then go, okay, this is what you need to start with. And so, like if your child only has ADHD, maybe that's all they need. And obviously, autism stuff, it's a lot more complex, but the foundations are still the same. So like the way that you need to start. And then we can put a link to that. We mentioned earlier primitive reflex integration. So I do teach a course called Bloomberg Rhythmic Movement Training. And that teaches rhythm. So that teaches how to integrate primitive reflexes through rhythmical movements that babies naturally do and through other like types of exercises. And I teach that either both virtually or in person. If you're local, I really want to do it in person. But if you're not, obviously, right now, today, I'm teaching a class to 2 gals in Grand Cayman Island.
Oh, wow.
So that's been kind of fun. Yeah, and they're OT and speech SLP. So I really, that is a very critical piece. So if you're a parent or a therapist and you want to host something local, if you are local and you want to host something local, I would, I love to be able to do it in person, but it's perfect for parents, OTs, CEUs are provided for those SLPs, nice. Physical therapists, whatever, anybody who works one-on-one with kids who struggle. And on Friday at 5:00, I'm going to do a live Q&A just for I have a Facebook group too. That's for BRMT for anybody who's just interested in learning a little bit more about that. So if you're a parent and you want to be able to because really you need to do stuff every day with your kid, and and I can't, well, you're probably too far away, and so I can't do that. And even if you're close, that's not reasonable either to like bring him to me every single day. So learning how to do that on your own at home and then just get support, that's like much more practical and doable. So that we can do that. And also, as a parent, I know, okay, so I'm sure you agree with me, Sarah, that we spend a lot of money on these solutions, like studying and looking for, we have spent, there's only a few rocks that I haven't dared unturned because they're like really cost prohibitive or whatever. But so I wanted to let all the parents know that there's actually a local company. It's in Provo, and it's dedicated to find solutions for people, just people to be able to afford everyday expenses and to benefit from their expenses. And that's called Transact Card, and it is a brand new. It's a Visa debit card checking account. It has a lot of rewards that, normally debit cards don't even have rewards. So on this debit card, you earn dollar for dollar in rewards wherever Visa is accepted. They call them Z-Bucks. They're making an online e-commerce platform called the Z Club. They have contracted same suppliers from Amazon to put on this Z Club because so there you can spend those rewards to buy down 50%, even sometimes 100% on flash sales. But and they'll give you 2 to 3% cash back in a power savings account that will open in November. So anyway, if anybody could just use a little bit of extra breathing room. So if you're spending money on things, you can at least say, well, I'm earning all these rewards so I can buy the other things that I need at least cheaper or whatever. Then we'll have a link for that also in the show notes. And that it's only $25 before November. It's only $25 with no annual fee ever. After November, there will be an annual fee. So we're still in a pre-launch phase. But anyway, that is something new that I found that I think for parents who are spending a lot of money for their kiddos and they're strapped. And I think that will be a good other source of relief. So like I said earlier, I'm very resourceful. I'm very eclectic. And so what I like to do best is just teach parents of, I do work with kids privately and families privately, but I'm more of because I collect so much knowledge, I'm more of like, I'm teacher and coach or whatever. Yeah, just to like, point people in the right direction and what to do.
Oh, wonderful. I'm so glad that we finally made it to this point and being able to do this and have you on the show. Before we go though, tell us where we can go to find you and support you and follow you.
Yes. So my website is wholechildlearningandwellness.com. I also have a Facebook and Instagram with that name. I'm more on Facebook than Instagram. But my email is lisa@wholechildlearningandwellness.com. I didn't even talk about, but I've written math books like for teaching how to teach math. So those are on Amazon. You can just search my name. Like, yeah, I mean, like I have a little bit of done a little bit of everything. But so you can contact me directly through the website. You can, contact me directly, and and I'm willing to talk to or help anybody.
Oh, that's so great. And there's such amazing services, tangible stuff that families can take control of and really start to see changes and make changes, which can make a really big impact on families in general and individuals. That's for sure. So thank you so much for your time today. It was so nice to have you on, and we will certainly be in touch.
Yeah. And I'm excited to maybe, delve in with your little ventures too with you. See what we can.
That's for sure. The more to come, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you so much. We'll see you soon.
Okay.